Welcome to the Indian Nations Conservation Alliance podcast, where Native voices lead the conversation on conservation, stewardship, and our responsibilities to the lands and waters that sustain us. Across Indian country, our homelands carry stories of relationship, resilience, and knowledge passed down through generations of people who live with the land and listen to what it teaches. Through conversations with tribal producers, ranchers, conservation leaders, elders, and community partners, we share the teachings and experience that continue to guide how we care for the water, the land, and the living systems that surround us. Together across Indian country, we recognize the spirit carried in our waters, our homelands, and our ecosystems, and we honor our role as caretakers for those yet to come. I want to begin today by honoring the land, the waters, the animals, and the generations of Indigenous peoples who have stewarded these lands since time immemorial. Across Indian country, tribal nations continue to lead the efforts that reconnect people to the land, the food systems, and ecological responsibility. Today's conversation focuses on tribal land management, regenerative agriculture, conservation innovation, and food sovereignty. We'll explore how Indigenous leadership is shaping the future of agriculture, conservation through both traditional knowledge and emerging technologies. I'm honored today to be joined by Delane Atcitty, the Director of the Indian Nations Conservation Alliance and the Interim Director of the Indigenous Grazing Lands Coalition. Delane's work focuses on supporting tribal nations in building resilient food systems, strengthening land stewardship practices, and advancing Indigenous-led conservation across tribal landscapes. Across Indian communities, land management has always been more than resource management. It is about responsibility, relationship, and ensuring future generations inherit healthy ecosystems and thriving communities. Today, many tribal nations revitalizing traditional stewardship practices while also embracing new technologies and innovative conservation approaches. From regenerative agriculture to grazing management, tribes are creating solutions that strengthen food sovereignty, ecological resilience, and economic opportunity. Through his work with INCA and IGLC, Delane supports tribal communities as they navigate these opportunities, helping build capacity, partnerships, and pathways toward Indigenous-led conservation and agriculture systems. Delane, I'd like to start by asking you to share a little bit about yourself and the path that led you into conservation and tribal agriculture work.
All right. Thank you, Emmett, and thanks for inviting me for this interview. I'm happy to share as much as I can with you. And so I started. My earliest recollection was when I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, and helping my grandfather and his brother out, and I was riding in the back of the pickup, and I was during summer break, and I remember looking back at the horses, and we were trailering them in a half-top trailer, and horses' manes were flying in the air, and I was like, man, this is the life. This is what I want to do, I don't want to sit in an office. I remember thinking that. And then my next opportunity was a tribal youth corps program. And so I went to our local veterinary clinic, and I asked, can you sponsor me and host me as an intern for the summer? And that turned out to several summers of working with them, going out on the land and working with our tribal community. And I remember, we did our part. We started to, build this kind of rapport with the tribal producers, and that was also an initiative to go into this line of work. And then later on, I worked at one of our tribal ranches, and every time I work in the tribal community, it always feels like you're working with your cousins, your uncles, your aunts, your grandparents, because they're always different age groups there, and so I really appreciated that. And then later on, I at one point I was like, man, $800 a month isn't gonna it's not going to buy me what I want in the future, you know. So it's like, this is all fun for now, and you know, shoeing horses on the side. I went to farrier school, and so I was like, I really need to get to school before I get too old. So I actually went to school when I was around 32 years old, and then by then you have a reason why you're doing something, you know. And goals are really important. And I set goals, and you know, I started to achieve them one by one. So that was kind of the start of my career in agriculture and conservation.
Right, right. It's inspiring you dedicated your career to supporting tribal nations and more particularly indigenous-led stewardship. Okay, can you talk about your roles with both the Indian Nations Conservation Alliance and the Indigenous Grazing Lands Coalition?
Yeah, so you know, I was working for different federal agencies. I managed some large ranches, and one day I just thought, why am I doing this for someone else? I should be doing this for our people, you know. And so one afternoon I was working for the BLM, and I literally walked into my boss's office and said, I'm not getting anything out of this. So I gave him my letter of resignation without a plan. And it's a good thing that I had a little bit of a consulting business at that time. And, you know, I didn't have any contract signed or anything. And through social media, Facebook, there was a guy that saw my work, and he's like, Delane, he says, you know, consider working as a consultant for Inca. So I started as a consultant, and then like 3 or 4 months later, Dick Gooby, he's the one that started Inca, and he had really good intentions of making the most of conservation with tribal nations. And so it kind of fell in line with where I wanted to go. And you know, I didn't mind having a steady job again. You know, consulting's it's pretty tough work. But once you get the credibility and get things lined up, it's a lot easier. But working for Inca, I got to travel to many nations and see how different issues regarding natural resources were being addressed, are not being addressed. You know, and so it's you know, as much as we think we're different, we're very much the same. It's amazing how the tribes are addressing their natural resource issues, are not addressing it. And then along the way, I created Indigenous Grazing Lands Coalition. And the thought behind that is we have 55 million acres of tribal rangeland throughout the United States. It really needs to be addressed on its own, you know, as it's separate from a conservation. And so we got together a board of directors representing, you know, different directions, different tribes. And fortunately, they've been riding it out with us for the last couple years. And it wasn't until like about 2 months ago we actually got some funding to pay a lawyer to do our 501c3 work.
Right.
So when that happens, this board will do their own thing, you know, and hopefully they get invited to all these meetings that we should have representation at regarding our range management. And you know, we first started that as a brainstorming. You know, 4 years ago we invited people to this Indigenous Grazing Lands Coalition to brainstorm. And one big thing that came out of this was the Nature Conservancy, North American Grazing, got a hold of us and said, we like what you guys are doing. How can we work together? Let's do a virtual fence. So we did the first virtual fence project on tribal lands. It's almost pushing 4 years ago now. And many things have come out of that strictly for rangeland. And we got an overwhelming support from National Grazing Lands Coalition. And they have been really supportive in including us in what they do.
Right.
And so, you know, we can't solve a lot of our issues internally. We got to figure out how do other people address it? How do non-natives address it? You know, what works for them? What doesn't work for them? Same way with tribes. There's a vast knowledge that we don't share together. We try to keep it internally, and it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, chase each other around the table.
Exactly. So that's how we started the Indigenous Grazing Lands Coalition, and that's kind of how it's a little bit separate from Indian Nations Conservation Alliance.
I see. Yeah, no, that's really particular. Um, Especially working from an NGO, government to government, and then working directly with tribes, getting in the land, boots on the ground. It's just that basic concept that, like you said, we might be separate sovereign entities, but we all lived at a basic concept. Go outside the tribe, get resources, and bring them back. So we're not constantly inside the tribe trying to figure things out. We're always constantly going out, getting resources, whether that's education, agriculture, money, anything. And we're bringing it back. We're bringing those resources, working directly with tribes, with Inca and IGLC, or any other work that you do. A significant part of your work involves partnering with tribal communities. What have you learned with working alongside tribes across different regions?
I think what's kind of really near and dear to me is learning them opening up to you their ecological knowledge and how they address issues in the past, and that's like that's a secret that they keep, and they trust you enough to open up and tell you about how they address stuff. Traveling to Alaska, to Southwest, to the Midwest, Oklahoma, and then up to Montana and here in Wyoming. Everybody has different pieces of the puzzle of how we survived, and so that's what I really thrive on, is learning, all that history. So.
Yeah, that leads right into my next question. Or what are some common priorities or challenges tribal nations are facing when it comes to land management today?
Well, fortunately, in my position as a NGO tribal uh, organization executive, I can talk freely about things and how things are being addressed. So, I tell people what I see from the agency side. I'm not afraid to call them out. We are taxpayers. We do deserve, their services. And a lot of times, some of the states are lacking big time. Right now there's one tribal nation that has 2 workers and 17 million acres of land that they service. And I bet you that's not an equal ratio for the rest of that state that they represent. And also, does the budget given to those nations represent, the land ownership for that state?
Right.
Same way with working with tribes. A lot of times uh, talking with the tribal ag, or I can let them know how we could work together. What are their priorities, and my idea of how we could make our make our partnership more beneficial. So there's a lot of flexibility there on my side, and so far, people come to our events. They wanna address these issues. We can't sugarcoat it, and we can't just put it aside, because there's no reason why we should have like 60 or 70% unemployment on our tribal lands,
Right.
with vast amount of resources.
Absolutely.
And then also, one of the nations, the average mean income 17 million. I'm sorry, $17,000 a year per tribal member, well below the poverty line. See, those things shouldn't be happening when we're rich with resources. One thing I do see is we lack a lot of management skills. So that's something that we've been addressing here at Inca. We've been providing strategic planning opportunities, governance, leadership opportunities, and also project management to help with that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. When we start thinking about technology and innovation and regenerative agriculture, and just like the whole idea behind give back to our tribes
Yeah,
and what it's going to take, talking about that economic downfall and talking about that disparity between how much poverty we are below the level, of just the poverty line itself, is um, is ugly.
Yeah.
Just to say the least, it's ugly.
One thing I bring up to our our bunch is that saying by JFK, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. We really need to put that in the tribal, ask not what you can do for, no, I'm sorry, I messed it up. Okay. Ask not what your tribe could do for you, but what you can do for your tribe. We really got to change our mentality. Instead of being a taker, we got to figure out how to be givers.
Right, right. And thinking about that given and working in the modern world, that technology, innovation, and regenerative agriculture, many people view technology and traditional knowledges as separate approaches. But what I've learned with Inca is and seeing is how we see technology supporting indigenous stewardship practices. How what role do tools such as GIS, remote sensing, precision agriculture, drones, or data collection play in modern tribal land management?
If anything, it's going to catch us up to where we need to be to manage it accurately. To have good business practices managing our resources, because I see that our forage assessments for stocking rates are way behind, and we have consultants that are telling our producers, we'll have that number for you in 2.5 years. And with technology now, like some of this AI uh, assessment cameras, you could get it that day. That day, within minutes, you could have a good idea, and you can, plus or minus. But who's to say these consultants aren't plus or minus either?
Yep.
At least they'll get you in the ballpark, and we can use that technology. Same way with virtual fencing. We're starting to use that more and more, and we're starting to figure out how we can offer that to tribal nations. But $14,000 for a 4-strand barbed wire fence, and that's for 1 mile. So this virtual fencing makes sense more and more on tribal lands. 51 million acres. You could cut it up in different shapes and use it strategically for water sources or water harvest station, and graze certain times, and you can use it for to do fire management. Knock out a lot of that cheatgrass. There's a lot of opportunities using modern technology.
Yeah, modern technology is very important. It kind of bounced into my next couple questions that I kind of really want to talk about is like regenerative agriculture. Why has it become such an important conversation in tribal communities?
I think regenerative agriculture for tribal communities is really low-hanging fruit, because it falls right in line with our values. We never been ones to harm Mother Earth, putting chemicals on her. Regenerative ag falls right in line with that thinking, using the animals to fertilize instead of putting chemical fertilizer, and then using no-till drill and keeping a cover, having a cover crop. It kind of falls in line with our thinking best. And I see, I've been a part, and not to say that I haven't, I used, that's the way I was brought up in the university system, and commercial cattle management was to go that route of not using regenerative ag. But the more I see the benefits, the more I see how it aligns with our tribal values.
No, that's really particular. And it touches on a lot, how technology can be used responsibly while still respecting indigenous values and cultural relationships with the land. And that's something that we all deal with as separate sovereign entities throughout Indian country as a whole, is we have that respect. Like you said, with that TEK specifically, that you already mentioned how respectful it is just for them to share that knowledge, particularly with us, and open up. That's, it takes a lot for tribal communities just to do that alone. How do regenerative practices support soil health and water conservation, biodiversity, and long-term sustainability?
Yeah, that's a big question. And it all interacts because it's all intertwined. One result could produce something beneficial for the next stage. And once we start to tweak, some of the issues, like we can, especially with soil health, that ties into the retention of water. A lot of times, like I see on social media, the younger generation is saying, "We're getting too much rain," and you're like, "Really? Too much rain? Did you think that we don't have enough cover on the land to accept that rain?" You know, but that TEK. One thing that my grandma taught me when I was young is there's different kinds of rain, and one of them was a male rain and a female rain. Female rain is nice and it's just a drizzle, and it leads to more productivity. A male rain just comes down harsh and blows everything out, and it's over. So I always tell people about that, and that they get a kick out of it. But yeah, all of this ties into each other. Biodiversity, and you think about it, you're like, if we know this much about how it should be in biodiversity, why can't the world accept biodiversity more in general? It's good for nature, it's good for us as people. And so there's a lesson to be learned there also. And then you mentioned, soil health, biodiversity, and what was I'm sorry, the other one you mentioned was?
Just long-term sustainability, but you really did cover all of those, what I asked. Like the interconnectedness that we have in our indigenous communities really plays a vital, important role. Like we're doing so much within our lands. There's a lot of, you go into academia, for example, they study a very specific thing, but then when you get into Indian country, you have to have different sword in a fire each
Yeah.
time. You got to know how to put these applicable practices.
Yeah.
They have to be applicable. They can't just be theory, because it doesn't make any sense. Um,
One thing I always talk about with people that we associate with is, the land's a reflection of ourselves. If the land's in bad health, then we're going to be in bad health. And same way they say with horses, horses are a reflection of you. How good your horse is really the reflection of your attitude and how you come up to your horse and work it. And I think the land is a reflection of us. You go to somebody's property and you see it overgrazed and barren. Well, that's a reflection of probably their bank account too.
right.
You know.
Yeah. With that interconnectedness, even moving into like food sovereignty and vertical integration, food sovereignty is becoming an increasingly important goal for tribal nations. What does food sovereignty mean to you? How were we using it in Inca or IGLC? And you got any examples surrounding food sovereignty?
Yeah, to me, food sovereignty definitely is tribal sovereignty, and we don't attach the two most of the time. When the casinos are open and running, everything's fine. But when they're not during COVID, then we realized that we didn't have food sovereignty and we had to ask for help. Where did our sovereignty go? Did it just disappear when the casino shut down? So we really got to, think about where we're going in the future with our sovereignty. And I really believe that there is a lot of work that needs to be done across the board with all the nations. One thing that I really promote is nations working together. We all have different pieces of the puzzle, but we're kind of reluctant to put it on the table and share it. And if we were to work together and share resources, there's a lot of intermarriage too. I joke about every place I go, there's always a Navajo in-law story. I get a kick out of it, but yeah, there's a lot of interconnectedness, and we need to capitalize on that so we could be vertically integrated. I was a part of the board of directors for NAPI, Navajo Agricultural Product Industry. It's a 110,000 acre farm during COVID. And we got caught on our heels also. You know, it kicked in. And so the best thing that we could do is we started to, after years of not making a profit, we started turning a profit at that time. And we were able to kick a few $1 million during COVID for personal protection equipment, and handing those checks to our tribal leadership so they could buy that for the tribe. And that was a really good feeling that, everything happened at that time when we really needed it. So, but there's no reason why a tribal farm and some of these tribal ranches, how they can't produce more of an income for tribal nations, especially. There's a huge opportunity for regenerative ag, having to be able to identify where your food's coming from, and just that wholesomeness of growing good quality food. One thing that I wish that we push more on is that low glycemic potato. That would really help out our diabetes on tribal lands.
Right. Yeah. No, you followed right into one of my next questions was why is it important for tribes to control multiple parts of the food production chain, right from the start, from production and processing to distribution and marketing? And played into a lot of what you just said, food sovereignty. We own the rights. It's our right to do this and play in whatever part each individual is going to play, from production or processing or hunting to distribution, and then most importantly marketing too. How are we bringing that quality forage back into the tribe? How are we making money for the tribe? Do you have any more to talk about on just particularly from the start to the finish, from all the way to marketing?
Yeah. So I was fortunate to go to graduate school at the King Ranch Institute in South Texas, and it's very limited amount of people that I think there's like 2 or 3 accepted a year. But people that were accepted in the program, they were from different different areas, and most of them were either worked for Ted Turner or they worked for one of the bigger churches. And so listening to their perspectives, and especially listening to that church perspective, because they're vertically integrated, they're able to feed their tribe. Their members, their church members, they're ready to feed all of them at a time of need. And we don't have that yet on tribal lands. We're not ready to feed all of our tribal members if and when COVID-5 happens, or anything happens. We're not there yet. But it's not to say that we can't get there, but we need to focus on our food systems. And for sure, we got to secure our water rights, because this all ties into our water rights, because we can't do anything when we don't have water rights. And, our conference last couple of days, we had some older gentlemen talk about water rights and how important it is. And I really believe that, that's the key for us to survive in the future, is to secure those water rights and contest them and get ready to go to court over them.
Right.
Long time ago, we were doing work on Hopi, and there was a old Hopi grandma. I always remember this. It was pretty neat. She said her grandson was introducing us to her, and then she says, "Oh, natural resources. Well, don't take the sinew off your bow, because you guys are going to have to fight for it. So don't get comfortable," she told us. And we're like, "Oh, all right." I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, them old folks always have them catty sayings, huh? Yeah, but they make sense when you start putting what they're saying into practice. Everything makes sense.
Yeah. So going from pasture to plate or farm to plate, that's something that we got to address as a whole instead of individually. Because if we start to do things, and sometimes I say this to our bunches, is sometimes somewhere along the way we started to not think as a tribe. We started to think individually. This is my ranch, this is my farm. Well, realistically, you don't have an economy of scale to really make a dent in anything if you think individually. But if you were to do it as a co-op or a chapter or an association, you could lessen your expenses and really make a go at profitability. But if you're doing it individually, it's going to be that much harder. If you do it as a whole too, there's also opportunities to market your whatever you have at a larger scale, because you have a story to tell. This isn't just any ordinary side of a leg of lamb, so to speak. This has a history of stewardship from the beginning. Stewardship of our resources, multi-species grazing in vast areas, summer and winter camp. Those are our stories, but we don't tell it. We talk about the commercial side of it, and at that time it just gets diluted like everybody else's stories. But we were at the beginning of this, and we need to capitalize on it.
Right. Talking about management of those tribal lands, like how do tribes balance economic needs with ecological stewardship? Kind of balancing that TEK with these modern technologies, in that same area, how do we balance that economic need, but also paying respect to that ecological stewardship?
Yeah, years ago I would say that it's probably not possible, but now it's even more important that we tell that ecological story, because we can tie that to adding value to our products instead of just being a commodity product that we sell at the border towns and we get whatever we get. We could market to different, maybe Whole Foods, or maybe natural grocers, or maybe McDonald's, or and this is native produce. There's something there that we're not capitalizing on. This is like really rich, productive. When my cows in Taos, one day I was standing there, and I was just looking at them, and I was like, man, these guys get the cleanest water, the best grass right on the side of the mountain, and here I'm taking them to auction, getting a commodity price. And it was more so because I didn't have an economy of scale. So I was like, there's got to be and since, this was years ago, but now direct to consumer starting to happen. But I think it works for some people, but a lot of our tribal nations are so far remote from that market that they need a hit. They're a few hours away from it. So this is where this New Trails beef concept started, and to me it's the missing puzzle that we need to get that money back into our local economy.
Yeah, that full circle right back into the tribal nation. Kind of speaking on leadership in that building capacity, you just kind of mentioned, how do organizations like Inca and IGLC build capacity for tribal leaders?
Yeah, so we've been investing quite a bit in number one thing that we do for a lot of our staff is, and it's been a few years, is we got them enrolled in Dale Carnegie Communication. And man, you could see how our staff really took off after that, because after that they had the confidence to visit with everyone and talk, and that's what we need, that networking, and meeting other people, and just having productive conversation. That was one way. Other leadership skills that we have is, one thing that we worked on here lately is time management. We get bombarded with a lot of projects, and we got to figure out how to prioritize them and address them as so. And also, where I like to see us really thrive is strategic planning. So we got the operational things down at the tribal level. We know how to do our husbandry, and so strategic planning, we got to have a big goal, almost a big scary goal, that if we could achieve it, that'd be the ultimate. And a lot of times we're lacking that across the board. You speak with tribal departments, they don't have a goal. They just exist sometimes,
Yeah.
And then some of our producers, I think some of them, their goal is just to get the next generation to utilize those resources, but that next generation, it's never brought up to them. It's never put down on paper. If you put it on paper, you're already committed, just writing it down. And so
50% of the problem. Yeah.
yeah,
Just knowing a problem is just understanding it.
yeah.
Trying to figure out a problem is just half the time is just understanding the problem.
Ideally, and these kids, they go to big cities and they never come home. They get into the rat race and they never come home. And I would like to see, if they want to stay home, they can stay home and make money in natural resources,
Right.
agriculture, whatever.
Creating those spaces for those brilliant people to come home, because right now there's no space for them. You see that in multiple tribal communities across the country. That was the base, like I said, the basic concept: go out, get education, come back, make a better community.
Yeah.
Right now we don't have no space for our educated young leaders.
Yeah.
There's no housing space, there's no workspace. It's just like incapable, and then they get picked up by somebody that's non-native, and then now they're building their dream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I sometimes I kid around about that. Is we go get our education and we take that, we exit our comfort zone and we make sacrifices, and we come back thinking about what our grandparents told us. Go make something of yourself. Don't stay in town. Get out of town. Learn something. We come back and we literally get treated like leopards sometimes. I remember watching an old movie where all the leopards were in a cave, and I was like, man, I guess that's where they want us. But nobody makes room for you. And so when I tell our young bunch, if they don't make room for you, at the table, go get your own table, bring it into the room, fill it with who you want to fill it with. There is such a thing as consultants and contractors.
Yep. What advice would you give to young Indigenous people interested in agriculture, conservation, or natural resource management?
I guess it depends on what stage they're at, but if you're young, go find a mentor. There's somebody out there willing to take you in. You're gonna have to knock on a few doors and find that right fit. Other than that, just write down your goals and get after it. There's scholarships. There's other ways around it. But just don't sit back and try to wish it into existence. You have to make those sacrifices. You gotta live in your vehicle sometimes. You gotta sneak into conferences. You gotta do stuff to learn, and nobody's gonna grill you for doing that because you're hungry for knowledge. So the younger generation, you got to have that hunger, and believe me, it'll pay off at the end. All those sacrifices, all those hard days, all those feeling awkward. Sometimes you're only native in the room.
Yep.
And so but all that pays off. At the end, toward the end, you're with your family. You're enjoying life. You're like, heck yeah, this was worth it.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna ask the question, but you tapped right on the head, is how can mentorship help strengthen the next generation of land stewards? And I think that's really important, depending wherever you're at on your journey. Grab a mentor, go get an elder, bring them in, go get somebody that's already been through it, learn what they did, and then create your own path from that. That's TEK as it is, that empirical data, or however academic wants to label it. That's just us getting our stories of how we survived and how we managed to keep moving forward, and then came up with our own plan to keep going forward. We think about visions and teachings, and when you think about the future of tribal agriculture and conservation, what gives you hope?
I guess where I get a lot of hope is hold on, let me think about that. That's kind of a tough one.
I could go on to the next
No,
one.
no, no, no. The reason why is because I don't know. I haven't seen a whole lot of hope. It's sad, but how do you address that? Well, I would say what gives me hope is the amount of resources we have, and finding those few special people that are willing to accept that challenge. Willing to go out there and put in their time, pay their dues, so to speak, go get an education. I had to go to Oklahoma to get my undergrad and get my graduate degree in South Texas, so far removed from home. But when you're busy, it's no big deal. You're like, I'm so tired, I don't care. And then you get up the next day and you're at it again. And time just flies when that happens. And, for me, one of my biggest personal achievements, I got to work at the King Ranch. And as a youth, I always read about it. And there I was working at one of the biggest ranches in the United States. And that was a personal accomplishment. And I really enjoyed that and enjoyed graduating from that program. But finding those youth that are willing to do that, I think that's what gives me hope, is that I know they're out there, and I know they're struggling to get to this point, and it's only a matter of time. They'll get here. We just got to identify them and figure out how we could help them. Pick them out and give them assistance.
Right. One of the powerful things you've shared today is that conservation, food sovereignty, and economic development do not have to exist separately. When guided by Indigenous values, they can strengthen one another. Just like we at Inca and IGLC, the plan is to develop economic strengths for Indian country as a whole, at any reservation throughout the United States. How can listeners support Indigenous-led conservation and regenerative agriculture initiatives?
I think Indigenous communities and members, they know the answer to all these problems. They were addressed at one time, way back in their history. Not climate smart. Climate change, it's happened before, and we survived it. And a lot of tribes, that's their re-emergence story tied into that. We have addressed all these issues. We got by for thousands of years knowing the answer to all this. So we do have the answer inside of our DNA. We know how to navigate this. So we just got to figure out now in modern times how we gonna try to do this in two different worlds that we live in. Because we got to figure out a balance to achieve that. And so I'd say outside help is always welcome. I had a discussion like this the other day on LinkedIn. There was a young lady saying, I want to visit a tribal nation. I don't want to be awkward, but I want to provide help in my own way. And I said, don't worry about offending anyone, because they realize you have good intentions coming onto their lands, and so don't worry about that part. They'll see it in you. So hopefully these tribal organizations and these partners, they'll anything they can do is welcomed, more than welcome. Because a lot of our tribes still need that little nudge, and we're finding out firsthand. The government is not always working with us. We lost quite a few grants that we were working on earlier this year, and we thought, and we should have known. We're like, well, these are signed grants and their agreements, and then we're like, well, at one time we had signed treaties too. So it's our
Oh wow, yeah,
it's our own fault.
That is a pinnacle I'm going to take with me from you. At one point in time, we had signed treaties too. Delane, I want to thank you for taking the time to share your experiences, insights, and vision with us today. I raise my hands to you for your leadership and your commitment to strengthening tribal communities, protecting Indigenous lands, and advancing food sovereignty across Indian country. Before we close, is there anything you'd like to share with tribal leaders, producers, youth, or community members who are listening today?
Well, I bring this up often is we can't live our life on a grant timeline. We got to figure out how to address our issues, and we can't just wait for grants to come around. And we got to meet people halfway. These organizations like ours, we want to work with everybody, but we don't have enough funding. If you meet us halfway, that's golden. If you can figure out a way to get to our event, we'll feed you. We'll take care of you. But we need that part of it. We need we need just that kind of a small commitment on people's part to meet us halfway, and we can help them with the rest. But we learn from all the communities as much as we offer, even more so. There's a high when you leave these communities and everybody's really they have a whole different take, and they're thanking you for coming out. And so it's awesome. And I'd like to visit and see their resources. I got to tour one of the tribal ranches out here, and we even went to some petroglyphs on the side of the one of the old petroglyphs, and I was like, man, this is awesome. Never would I ever have a chance like this, but this is a good mix, and I'm hoping that we can build this out more, and we can, this Indian Nations Conservation Alliance. I have a dream that it could be something like the Nature Conservancy, and work with different indigenous communities all over Turtle Island, not just where we're at now.
All right. Thanks, Delane. That was a great insight. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Inca TEK Podcast. Until next time, continue learning, continue listening, and continue building relationships with the land and with one another. Don't forget the ecosystems that you come from, and don't forget the families that are tied to your lands.
Thank you for listening to the Inca Podcast. This program is supported through grant funding from the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Rural Climate Smart Initiative, and the Indigenous Grazing Lands Coalition. These efforts help support grassroots producers, tribal ranchers, and the conservation partners working to strengthen stewardship across Indian country as a whole. The views expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA. To learn more about Inca and our work, visit us online and join us for the next conversation. Thank you.